You know that moment when your life seems to tie itself into a knot, and you realize that everything you believe to be solid simply crumbles? I lived that. My parents, the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally, called me to a meeting that, in my naivety, I believed would be a family moment. But what happened that day was a shock that would change my life forever. I expected lunch, maybe a conversation about life, but I was surprised by something completely different. A will. And the worst part, I wasn't included. All the assets, all the savings, everything my parents had built over their lives were destined for my siblings. Nothing for me, not even an explanation. Just a cold, hard blow of reality. Have you ever felt betrayed by the people you trusted the most? Have you ever had to face the harsh truth that, to some people, you simply don't matter? But this isn't a story of defeat. On the contrary, it was in that moment that I discovered no one was going to save me, that I would have to turn things around on my own. And that's exactly what I did. What happened after that day changed my trajectory in unimaginable ways. And now, I'm going to tell you every detail of this story. But I warn you, not everything was easy, and some parts still haunt me to this day. The unexpected invitation when my mother called me that afternoon, her voice was strangely neutral. No affection, no warmth like I remember from childhood. Just a dry invitation. We need to talk. Come to the house tomorrow. I felt a knot in my stomach. My relationship with my parents had never been the best, but this felt different. A summons, not a request. As I hung up the phone, something inside me already told me I shouldn't go. But how could I ignore it? After all, they were my parents. I spent the night restless, imagining 1,000 scenarios. Maybe they were sick, needing help. Maybe it was an attempt to reconnect. Or maybe something worse. The next day, I put on my best mask of normalcy and went. When I arrived at the house where I grew up, everything felt out of place. The living room was too pristine, as if they had erased every trace of our history. My siblings were already there, sitting on the couch, serious, silent. And then my father cleared his throat and looked at me with that distant gaze. We have something to say. I felt a chill run down my spine. Time seemed to slow down as my heart pounded in my chest. My mother opened a folder of documents, and before I could fully understand, the words came out of her mouth with surgical coldness. We want to talk about our will. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, but the expressions on their faces made me realize this was real. What came next was worse than anything I could have imagined. The cold and irrevocable sentence. I wanted to laugh, but my throat felt stuck. A will? Was this serious? My eyes scanned the room, looking for a shred of empathy in my siblings' faces, but all I found were blank expressions, as if this had been decided long ago. My father adjusted his glasses and continued, as if reading a contract, impersonal and bureaucratic. We're leaving everything to your siblings. The house, the money, the assets. That's what we decided. Just like that, no hesitation, no remorse. My mother didn't even look at me. I felt my chest tighten, a sensation that went beyond anger. It wasn't just about money or material things. It was about belonging, about being seen, about knowing I wasn't important enough to be remembered even in their final plans. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak, faltering. But why? My mother took a deep breath and finally looked at me. Because we think it's for the best. That was it. No real justification. No regret. The silence that followed was deafening. My world collapsed in that instant. I tried to control the wave of emotions hitting me. Anger, sadness, humiliation. But it was impossible. My siblings didn't say a word. They didn't protest, didn't intervene, didn't try to soften the decision. They just accepted it, as if I had never existed, as if I were just an insignificant detail in the family. I slowly got up from the chair, trying to maintain my dignity. I see. And I left without looking back, feeling every piece of my heart shatter inside my chest. The emptiness after the storm. I left that house without saying goodbye, without even closing the door properly behind me. The air outside felt heavy, suffocating, as if the entire city was closing in on me. My heart was still pounding, and my mind kept circling one question. Why? What had I done to be excluded like that? I wasn't perfect, of course, but I had tried. I had been there when I needed to be. And now I was a forgotten name on a piece of paper signed by my own parents. The anger came in waves, and after it, the emptiness. I spent days and days reliving every moment of that meeting, trying to find meaning in something that made no sense. I withdrew from the world, from social media, from friends. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to hear that everything would be okay, because I knew it wouldn't. How do you move forward after something like that? How do you wake up every day knowing you're not important even to the people who brought you into this world? Months passed and the pain didn't fade. On the contrary, it rooted itself in me. The humiliation burned like an open wound, and the resentment grew like a shadow. My siblings went on with their lives, enjoy what they had inherited, while I felt like a stranger, a mistake erased from the family history. But deep within that pain, something began to form. A spark, a thought. If they saw me as insignificant, maybe it was time to prove them wrong. The first step toward the turnaround of pain was still there, throbbing, but something inside me began to change. I started looking in the mirror and seeing a version of myself I barely recognized. Someone broken, consumed by bitterness, waiting for time to heal something that couldn't be fixed. My parents had made their decision. My siblings were satisfied. And me, I was there, stuck, sinking deeper. It was then that, for the first time in months, an idea crossed my mind with force. I don't need them. This idea became an obsession. If I wasn't worthy of the family's inheritance, then I would create my own legacy. But how? I had no money, no support. All I had was my pain and an insane desire to prove to myself that I wasn't invisible. I started small, studying, looking for ways to rebuild. I spent sleepless nights devouring books about success, mindset, growth. And little by little, the anger that once destroyed me began to turn into fuel. The first real step was the hardest, breaking out of inertia. I signed up for online courses, sought opportunities, forced myself to believe there was a path for me. I didn't know exactly where this would lead, but one thing was clear. I would never let anyone decide my worth again. The feeling of being left behind still haunted me. But now, for the first time, I had something bigger than the pain. I had a purpose. Rebirth in the midst of chaos. The path to change was anything but easy. Every step felt like a challenge, as if the world was testing my determination at every turn. With no money, no support, no one to tell me I was on the right track, I had to become my own guide. I worked jobs I never imagined I'd take, swallowed my pride countless times, and heard more no's than I could count. But inside me, that voice persisted. They didn't believe in you, but that doesn't mean you're not capable. It was during one of those endless nights where exhaustion and doubt almost made me give up that I had my first big idea. I realized that instead of trying to follow the traditional path so many others took, I needed to build something that was truly mine. I started studying entrepreneurship, how to turn skills into opportunities. What did I know how to do that could set me apart? What could I offer the world? It took time, but I found my answer. From that moment on, my obsession changed. It wasn't about proving something to my parents or my siblings anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of building a future entirely my own. I began investing every free second into my idea, refusing distractions, ignoring pitying looks and sarcastic comments. I still hadn't arrived anywhere, but for the first time in my life, I felt in control. The first victory, the process was slow, torturous. So many times I thought about giving up, about accepting that maybe my parents were right to exclude me. But every time that idea crept in, I remembered how I had been discarded without hesitation, as if my existence was irrelevant. That pushed me forward. And then one day it happened. My first victory. Small, almost insignificant to the world, but huge to me. After months of relentless dedication, I got my first client. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or just collapse. It was real. Someone saw value in what I did. That changed everything. Every no I had received before now seemed like a necessary step to get here. I took that hard-earned money and immediately reinvested into my business. There was no luxury, no comfort, but there was something even more powerful. Concrete proof that I could make this work. That first success brought another, and then another. Nothing came easy, but now I understood the game. The key wasn't luck, it was persistence. Every failure that had almost destroyed me before now seemed like just a passing obstacle. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a bystander in my own life. I was building something real, something no one could take away from me. I hadn't won yet, but now I knew victory was just a matter of time. The rise and the resistance, the initial success was addictive. With every new client, every new opportunity, I felt like I was proving not just to the world, but to myself that I was capable. But the universe has a cruel way of testing our convictions. Just as I began to rise, the first attacks came. People who had once ignored me started questioning how I had achieved so much on my own. My siblings, who had never cared about me, suddenly seemed concerned about my choices. And then came the final blow. My parents reached out to me again. The phone call was unexpected, as dry as ever. My mother, with her meticulously controlled voice, wanted to talk. This time, I laughed. It was curious how, when I was at my lowest, they had nothing to say, but now that I was starting to rise, suddenly my name was remembered again. Despite my morbid curiosity, I refused the invitation. I already knew where this would lead. They didn't want to hear me. They didn't want to understand me. They wanted to know how I had managed to rebuild without them. And that's when I realized a great truth. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to them. Everything I had built, every sleepless night, every swallowed tear, every obstacle overcome, it was all mine. For the first time in my life, I was free. And there was nothing more powerful than that. The final confrontation, the following days were strangely quiet. I knew my refusal wouldn't be easily accepted. And, indeed, it didn't take long for the unexpected to happen. My mother showed up at my door. Without warning, without asking for permission. She was just there, as if she had never excluded me from her life. I looked at that familiar face and felt a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, indifference. But above all, there was a certainty. I was no longer that girl begging to be accepted. She came in, looked around, and I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. My house wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I had built it alone, and that bothered her. She sat on the couch and got straight to the point. I didn't expect you to go this far without us. I swallowed a dry laugh. Without them, they had never been with me. But I just listened. She continued, tried to explain the inexplicable, saying it was a difficult decision, that things weren't so simple. Empty words, no real apology. And then came the question I had been expecting. Do you forgive us? A heavy silence hung in the air. I could have thrown everything in her face. I could have asked why they had discarded me, why they had never given me a chance. But something inside me had changed in that moment. I didn't need their answers. I didn't need their regret. I had already won. I looked into her eyes and simply said, I moved on. The conversation ended there. And for the first time, I felt the story was truly over. The weight of the choice after my mother left, I stood there at the door, feeling the cold wind hit my face. The feeling was strange. It wasn't relief nor happiness. It was something deeper, a silent liberation I didn't even know I needed. For so long, I had carried this pain as if it were part of me, as if it defined who I was. But now, I saw clearly. I wasn't the victim of this story. I was a survivor. In the days that followed, my siblings tried to reach out. Lukewarm messages, questions without real interest. I could have responded. I could have tried some reconciliation. But why? To go back to being that invisible shadow in the family? No, I didn't need that anymore. It wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about respect. And I had learned, in the cruelest way possible, that respect isn't asked for. It's demanded. As time passed, I stopped looking back. My parents had made their decision. I had made mine. Life went on and I went with it. But something stayed with me. The certainty that I would never again allow anyone to decide my worth. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define me. I still had a long journey ahead, and this time, I was writing my own destiny. The life I built years past, and the scar of that rejection still existed, but it no longer hurt. It became just a reminder of who I had been and who I had chosen to be. My business grew beyond what I could have imagined. That girl who left her parents' house humiliated and with nothing was now the author of her own story. I traveled, met people who truly supported me, built something solid. The money came, but the real wealth wasn't in it. It was in the peace I found within myself. My parents, they never reached out again. My siblings went on with their lives. And from what I heard, the inheritance money wasn't enough to fill the void they felt. What I learned is that no matter how much we seek approval, some people will never see us the way we want them to. And that's okay. What matters is that when we look in the mirror, we know exactly who we are and what we're worth. Today, I tell this story not with bitterness, but as a testament that the impossible only exists for those who accept their limitations. I could have drowned in resentment, but I chose to use the pain as fuel. And if there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that no one can erase us if we decide to shine on our own. That was the greatest turnaround I could have made.